Ahoy there, fellow travelers. Welcome to E-Travels with trules, a personal and literary podcast of travel adventures and misadventures from around the world. This is Eric Trules, and thanks for listening. Welcome to another behind-the-scenes episode on the E-Travels with trules podcast. I'm Eric Trules, and today I'll be talking with Hayden Lee, the self-professed son of a hippie and a biker, and the host of the popular Travel Stories podcast. Hayden is a musician and an intrepid world traveler who can't help but navigate every conversation into a story. Sounds familiar? Memorable stories are what life and travel and this podcast are all about. The Travel Stories podcast is a weekly show that brings you original stories of freedom and adventure from seasoned travelers. And if you are a seasoned traveler, you already know that some road stories capture not only a moment in time, but also all the emotion, serendipity, and wonder that come with travel. Hayden interviews fellow travelers, fellow podcasters, digital nomads, and other guests about their lifestyle, their entrepreneurship, and about their amazing stories from the road, all with original music by Cody Crabb. Welcome to the show, Hayden.
Trules, thank you very much, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Why don't we start with you telling us about where you're from, how you started traveling, and when and why you started your podcast. That's a mouthful, but...
Sure. So I'm from a place called Shropshire in England, very rural place. It's actually where the Lord of the Rings was based. So there's a big hill, and that is the hill from Lord of the Rings. I should know what that's called. But it's very quaint, very medieval. It's where Charles Darwin was born. It's very much not me. And so I was born there. I started traveling when, actually it was funny. I was digging around. I love a bit of nostalgia. So I was digging around yesterday on my old messages between me and my ex-girlfriend. I wasn't listening to old 80s ballads at the time, it was nothing like that. But I found the message that I sent her saying, hey, we should just go travel. So I sent her a message saying, man, let's just go next week. Let's just go and move to Australia. The following week, we had moved to Queensland, Australia. And that was back in maybe 2011, early 2011. And that's when I really started traveling, outside of Europe and everything like that. And as for the podcast, that started April 2016. And man, it's just so much fun. I think the biggest thing for me is the inspiration. We want to be a force for inspiration, because I think to inspire is well, it sounds cheesy, but to inspire is a gift. To be able to inspire is a gift. And for me, the constant evolution of the show and the making it better and making it, more appealing to everyone and receiving all these things from people, man, it's so much fun. As you know, podcasting is so much fun.
Well, the making of it, the traveling, the telling the stories, the mixing the original music with the sound design is really fun. You can really just get lost in it and make it better and better. It's the reaching an audience and marketing and podcast festivals that are all new to me. I've been in many other fields. I've been an artist for almost 50 years, first as a modern dancer, then as a solo performer, documentary filmmaker, clown, a lot of different things. But this is a new field for me. And at first, I was very conscious of choosing not to listen to other travel podcasts. I fooled myself to think there aren't any. That mine was going to be the one and only. And in any event, it was going to be unique. And so that allowed me to come up with my own voice and my own style. And I found two wonderful young musicians and sound engineer to put this all together. And then I found a really good producer who knew all about the podcasting field. And he said, start listening to other travel podcasts. And I did. And yours stood out to me. I thought you'd been doing it much longer. And I think I've seen your name out in the field and in the podcast movement. And I just thought that maybe we shared a common aesthetic, that it wasn't all about, travel deals and, just, a description of hotels and where tourists should go. And I don't think, most travel podcasters are doing that, but I thought you had sort of an artistic sensibility and your stories were unique and authentic. And then we communicated, and it just seemed like we should be guests on each other's shows.
Man, you're not wrong that we share these things. I mean, our paths are somewhat mirrored. Like yourself, you came from the acting, the drama, the clown. That we've got to talk about that. That's amazing. All of that background. And I myself, I came from a musician background. And so whilst I do have the production on my side, my degree is in, what's it called again? Sound design and production. I always forget what it's called. But I'm a musician at heart. I've been a musician since I was 11. And that's, I think, what we bring to this podcasting space. Like you say, there are podcasts out there where they have their set questions and they have and it's very, very interview. I know this is an interview, but it's very interview based. You know what I mean? And it's, getting in all the buzzwords and everything like that. And for people like myself and yourself, I don't know how much fun we would have with that. We need to have our creative flair, right?
It's the immersive sound that brings the listener there, plus the story, plus I hope maybe a sense of humor or an artistic point of view that just doesn't recount or document the story of what happened and where you've been and how fantastic the mountain climb was, but that somehow the mountain climb and facing your fear in the third world was somehow transcendent, and that the listeners also know about travel is about confronting your fears and letting go and living in the moment. Most travelers do know that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I always say our show, and I would say your show as well, it's less of an educational podcast. I think a lot of podcasts are seen as educational. You're learning things, and it's more entertainment and inspiration. It's a different spin on it, I love that about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was thinking in coming to the interview when I first started traveling, and of course my parents took me on little vacations when I was a kid to Lake George, New York, and we went fishing, and my dad overthrew the boat, and I ended up on the top of a dock house. But when I graduated college, I decided to do what a lot of digital nomads are doing these days. Just chuck it all and not become a doctor the way my parents wanted me to become, my son, the doctor. And just get in my car, who I named Steppenwolf back in those days.
Oh, yes. Yes. Perfect, man. I was just listening to the pusher. That's so cool.
1970. Wolfie was the car's nickname. It had a painted camouflage green and brown left rear fender, a Pontiac 1964. And I just drove up and down America like it was one big map. I started in New York. I went to Washington, Savannah, all the way down to the Florida Keys, back up north, back down south, just one city after the other. I never knew where I was going to stay. And that was unusual in those days, and there was no internet. So it was a big unknown adventure. And then the other thing that I discovered in my life as I became an artist, a dancer, etc., a wonderful way to travel was to bring my work around the world. I brought my clown company to Europe, to Rotterdam, to a big international festival in 1979. I brought 8 clowns, and we went to Holland, Switzerland, and France. And then years later, I performed solo performance shows at the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland. I premiered a feature-length documentary I made called The Poet and the Con in a Swiss festival. And it's such a treat to be welcomed as an artist where people are interested in you and how you made the work, and you have an audience for it, and they're putting you up and feeding you. It's just a treat to see the world that way.
Oh, absolutely, man. And, You're saying about the getting in the car and just driving and just ending up where you end up and not knowing where you're going to end up and then what happens tomorrow, you know? And for me, the word is freedom. You know, that's always been, obviously being the son of a hippie helps, but the word freedom for me has always been the goal. You know, that's always been my goal. And I think travel, or the way I travel and how it sounds the way you travel, I think that's the closest that we can come to really attaining it. You know, what do you think?
First, I'll confirm that the word freedom happens to be my favorite in the English language.
Are we the same people? I'm sure we are. Aren't we?
I think
it's time travel. What's going on?
Different continent and a few years between us. But you know, I teach self-expression and creativity at a great university here in LA called USC. And I tell my students my favorite word in the English language is free or freedom. And that is the very thing I'm trying to teach them. So I talk about traveling without booking hotels in advance, but I give them tools of wacky movement and strange sound. And it's very uncomfortable. You have to go through your discomfort. You have to let go of your self-consciousness and all your fears to become free. And travel is constantly demanding that, you know, if you get lost and you don't have a reservation and you have no friends and you don't speak the language and your stomach gets upset, you know, what are you going to do? You have to trust yourself and live in the moment.
Man, you're absolutely right. It's that vulnerability. I always bring up the word vulnerability because when you're out there and like these things do happen, you're making yourself vulnerable purposefully so that you can attain this freedom. I think to get this freedom, you need to have a certain amount of vulnerability to open yourself up to anything bigger than what's outside your doorstep. You need to make yourself vulnerable. And when we're in these positions, man, I don't know. I just think this vulnerability is just such a massive thing, not even just in travel, in life in general. And when you find yourself on the road and when you find yourself like some terrible things happened and you have no idea what you're going to do, that's the time I think where the personality traits of being able to laugh at this ridiculously bad situation, that's the times when those come into play. You know, in fact, I remember, and I always go in a story, so I apologize, but I remember one time, right, it was me, my ex-girlfriend, her sister was in the back, right, in a V6, 3.6 liter Commodore in Australia, right, the biggest engine I'd ever driven. And, obviously it's not US cars, you know, but, we were there and we were kind of near Cairns, but not really. It was middle of nowhere, right? And we had no money, no cash. We had debit cards, but no money on them. We had phones that didn't work because we had no money. And I thought I had just enough fuel to get to Cairns, just enough. And then we thought, well, when we get there, we'll figure it out. You know, I'll find a job. We'll sleep in the car. We thought we were going to sleep in the car, you know. And so, we're there. We're on our way. The car breaks down, right? Which obviously Murphy's Law, it's gonna. And then it starts raining. I couldn't write this, right? It started raining and we're there in the middle of nowhere. There's smoke coming from the bonnet, right? And we have no money. We have no nothing. And we just looked at each other and it was funny. Like this situation where we didn't know where it was going to go, what was going to happen, how we were going to get out of it. But I knew that we would get out of it. Things always work out. And
however they work out, they've worked out, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I always say, like, in a year's time, will you remember this moment? Yeah. And if, you know, probably not. It'll work itself out and you'll be fine. You'll end up telling a story on a podcast about it.
Reminds me of a couple of things. One is Woodstock. I think you might have missed that one, but in 1968, it was just rain and mud and slop, and most people it was out of their control, and that's what we're talking about. Travel takes you out of your comfort zone and out of being in control, and Woodstock was like that, and still it turned out to be a defining event of the generation, and no one could have predicted it. The other thing that, where you say maybe we are the same person, vulnerability is a word I use all the time, also in my teaching. I teach a class in solo performance, autobiographical storytelling. Which is what I think podcasting is. It's an oral radio form of solo performance for me, telling a story. And like the physical letting go in improvisation, going to your deepest, most vulnerable wound, scar, secret story is your greatest strength. So that's what I tell my students. Your vulnerability is your greatest strength. And covering it up is not the way to become a better or stronger storyteller, but going inside yourself and identifying your most frightened, most vulnerable moment is what reaches an audience, and that's what stories are created on, whether it's movies like Rocky or Juno, where in the beginning of the movie, Juno gets pregnant and the story's based on what's going to happen. Is she going to give it up? Is she going to have an abortion? So you need vulnerability to tell good stories, along with, in podcasting, little sound design and original music.
Oh, absolutely. I really think vulnerability is one of the keys to life. I mean, even if you look at relationships and people and friends and just the way people interact with each other, if I see someone walking down the road, it's just a guy, right? It's just a bloke. He's just walking down the road like everyone else, right? But as soon as I see him drop his ice cream on the floor, man, my thoughts about that guy change. Suddenly I'm like, oh man, I want that guy to succeed in life. I want that guy to fulfill all his dreams.
Underdog. Now
Yes,
you're talking about clowning, drop the ice cream on the floor, take a pie in the face, trip, for the audience. Clowns make themselves look stupid so people can laugh at them.
Yeah. And surely that's vulnerability as well, right?
Yeah,
Because if
absolutely.
man, it's so important. So important. And when you're talking about travel as well, in order to go up to someone in their country, maybe you don't even speak their language well and you're reading from a little book of phrases, or maybe you've memorized a couple. You need to open up and make yourself vulnerable in order to go and talk to them, in order to say, hey man, how do I get to here? Or anything like that. The act of doing that is you yourself bringing on this vulnerability within yourself. And because you're showing that, I think it bridges that connection between people. Does that make sense?
Sure, it does. How do you choose where to go or when to go or why to go? And are there any places that I'll just leave it. I'll leave a hanging sentence right there.
Ooh, good question. Well, why to go is always the same. It's always the pursuit of freedom. It's always, kind of because I should, because I can, because I will, because any other word that goes there, And the places that I go, well, now I'm looking at places where I can travel on a motorcycle. So, for example, I traveled from the south of Vietnam to the north on a motorcycle, and now I'm heading out in a few months to go through every country in mainland Europe in one trip on a motorcycle. And that, for me at least right now, is maybe a truer, again, this is for me, maybe a truer expression of freedom. Having everything that you own. I only own 5 kilograms of belongings. So having everything you own on the back, and tools in the panniers, the saddlebags rather, and just heading out. And you're just this one being with this one machine, and you're just in the middle of nowhere, and you don't have to be anywhere. So for me, not European travel, motorcycle travel. For me, that's how I'm choosing at the moment. Yeah.
I discovered the joy of travel on a tiny little motorbike, 100cc motorbike in Vietnam, up in Dalat in the highlands. And
one of my favorite places in the world, hands down.
Beautiful. But at first I hired a guide and I sat on the back of his motorbike for 5 days. I was really tired at that point in my trip, and I would be holding on to his waist and sometimes nodding almost off the motorbike. And he introduced me to Red Bull, which immediately solved the problem. But maybe a week later, for me, it was just not being afraid or confronting my fear. I said, I can do this myself. And I got myself a little motorbike. And that was the essence of freedom. Driving the motorbike along the Mekong River, out in it, past local people, rice fields, and just being able to lean into the wind in any direction you wanted to go to. It was beautiful. And always in Southeast Asia, I've taken a motorbike now.
Oh, absolutely. You have to in Southeast Asia. I'm positive that we are the same person. It's some sort of weird thing going on here. But yeah, I mean, in the Mekong Delta, that's where I got my motorcycle when I was there. I also had a 100cc. I believe it was a Honda Wave. Now, it would be ridiculous if yours was too. But yeah, so I got it down there because the reason I was down there was I flew into Saigon, right? And I'm there. I'm looking for, again, I'm into a story, and I'm looking for somewhere to stay. I'm looking for, whatever you look for when you just get into a city. And then this guy pulls up next to me on a bike, right? Like they do, And I was like, I'm good. I'm just looking for a place. And he hands me a book, right? And I open the book, and it just says, if you're reading this, you're standing in front of Captain Kim. Go with this man. And I read it there was every language, Portuguese, German, every language, just so many people saying the same thing. And so I thought, yeah, why not? I say yes to everything. At this point, I was saying yes to everything. So absolutely. So I got on the back of his bike, and about 2 hours later down the road, I was thinking, where am I? What's going to happen? And, yeah, he was just taking me down the Mekong Delta. I hung out with, himself and his wife, and he just showed me around all the different islands. I'm sure you've seen them yourself. And, it was just kind of like in a guide way, but he just wanted to do it. He was getting on in his years, and he just wanted to share the experience, I suppose, share the place. So that's why I was down there.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I went with Mr. Duke. That was, that was my guide's name. And he had been in, what they called the American War there, not the Vietnam War. And he had been in re-education camps, and, he gave me a view of the war that I missed, along with seeing how many ex-American GIs, soldiers were there, either with families, children, or just floating around in, PS, what is it? Post-traumatic stress disorder, and never had come back. He showed me, I guess, what I had felt guilty for missing, the Vietnam War for my generation. And, he was so, caring. He really took good care of me. But then, everyone else on the tour was called Kim. So I think he was part of your family. And I went on Kim's tours, where I'd be packed into a van with 10 other backpackers, and I'm 50 years old. And, anyway, Southeast Asia was quite a trip. I ended up finishing, in Bali, where I ended up meeting my wife in 2000. And, we just celebrated our 14th anniversary. We got married in 2003.
That's fantastic, man. No way. Man, Bali as well. What a place. What a good place. Bali's one of those places where you can go there as an 18-year-old Australian clubber and have the best time of your life, going to all the discos and whatnot, whatever they do. Or you can go there, go only to the rural places, go to where, what I would say, the real Bali is, and have the best time of your life. It's one of those places where it does really cater to a lot of people, It's a cool place like that.
Well, Kuta Beach in Bali became the Australian surfer mecca, and then it grew like a tourist plague all up the coast, and it became one sarong mall, little like Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley. But like you say, Bali, although a tiny island on the world map, is a pretty big island where you can get out of the tourist crush. And my wife and I ended up buying a little villa in Bali on the east coast town, the ferry hub, a town called Padang Bai. And it's way down a dirt road in the outback, and it's a lovely villa. We have a little pool. Now it's complicated when we're not there, and to really know the real ins and outs of local business and the Indonesian government and how friendly they really are to expats is complicated. But Bali is a magical place.
Oh, it really is. I find that a lot with Southeast Asia, just in general. Because, I mean, I spent a lot of time in Australia, and then I thought, well, let's move on further. Where should I go? And then you just look at a map and, oh, there you go, Southeast Asia. You get all these countries there, and they're all so different from each other, but they all have these common threads of the people are so friendly, so welcoming, so accommodating, so glad to see you. I know I'm generalizing here, but I've found that a lot in Southeast Asia. The people just seem so nice, so hospitable, so awesome. And there's a lot of common threads like that. I love it.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with you. Third world countries to are so-called poor, don't have to be, desperate or unfriendly. They are dependent on tourists, but when I went to Cuba, for example, in 2009, I had a completely different experience. People were really stressed out and really didn't honor or respect their tourists. I had a place booked, to stay in for a week, but right before I got there, the host found somebody who could take the place for 2 weeks. And he said, sorry, you can't have it anymore. You can stay in this little hole in the wall. And, I think that place was so different than just right nearby. Jamaica was poor, but friendly. And Southeast Asia seems to, depend on the tourist business, but still be very welcoming at the same time.
Oh yeah, and I think a weird mixture of the two there is I stayed in a favela in Rio, or in Niterói, which is like right next to Rio, and in the daytime in this favela they were the friendliest people. There were families there. It was amazing, really nice place, In the nighttime it changed. In the nighttime it got dark. It got dark, obviously, but it got dark. You would hear gunshots, you would hear motorbikes all going past the window, and it was just, I don't know, that change from night to day was just ridiculous, but I love the place anyway. I love Rio in general. Yeah.
I've been to Rio. I haven't been to Buenos Aires. That's one place I wanted to go.
Same.
Which brings me to something I do with all my guests, and I hope you're up for it. I think it's time for the Trules Travel Quiz.
Ooh, yeah, I'm definitely up for it. Let's do it.
Some of the things you answered already, but you can reinvent them in the moment. Where were you born?
I was born in rural Shropshire, England.
Where are you from?
I am also from rural Shropshire, England. I was born in Shrewsbury. The birthplace of Charles Darwin. That's like the only thing it's famous for. And I grew up in a small, tiny village in rural Shropshire. My friends were cows and sheep, and the smell of my childhood is also cows and sheep. That's that's where I'm from.
Well, then you might be the only person to answer these first three questions with the same answer. Where do you call home?
I do not call here. I'm here at the moment. I do not call here home. I have never felt like I've belonged, particularly in this country. Again, I'm generalizing, but I've just never felt like I've belonged, and I don't know why. Where I would call home, the only place for me that has ever felt like home has been Melbourne, Australia. I lived there for maybe 3 or 4 years, something like that. And it's just, that place was way more me. That place was me. This place isn't particularly me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. What's your favorite place in the world?
Ooh, okay. I'll say, I'll be very particular. The road between Dalat and Bao Loc. I don't know how to say both of those names, in Vietnam. I know you've been there yourself. And that stretch, that place in general, rural Vietnam, you can't beat it. I don't think you can beat it.
You might be the only person who's going to name that as their favorite place in the world. What do you think it means to be a traveler?
I think it means that you are in, but it's not mutually exclusive. But for me, it would mean being in constant pursuit of freedom. For me, that's what it would mean.
That's cool. What's one place that you've always wanted to go where you've never been?
Oh, man.
Just one.
Oh, just one.
And why?
Oh, another question. Okay, I got this. I can do this. All right. Let's see. So many places are going through my head right now. I'm so sorry to the editor. Let's say, Curitiba, Brazil. That's one place where I've read up on it a lot. It seems like I love Brazil anyway. I've been a speaker of Portuguese for a few years now, and I feel like I feel like Curitiba would be my Brazilian Melbourne. Curitiba for me.
Never heard of it. Thanks for the tip. What's your favorite city? Why?
Melbourne, because when you walk down a road like Brunswick Street or Smith Street, you will see every restaurant from every different nationality that you can think of. You will see people from every nationality you can think of. And what you will see the most is you will see people with dreadlocks and no shoes. Therefore, Melbourne is my favorite city in the world.
That's cool. What's your favorite park or non-urban place? Why?
Oh, man. My favorite non-urban place. Oh, man. Oh, okay, I've got one. My favorite non-urban place would be a place called Lençóis in Barreirinhas in the northeast of Brazil, near São Luís. And it's basically, imagine Tatooine from Star Wars with these little lakes, but these kind of greeny blue lakes all intertwined within this Tatooine barren desert land. It's truly amazing. If you want to, I would suggest checking out a picture of it on Google or something. Lençóis, Lencois. It is amazing.
I hope some of our listeners might check it out. What's your favorite mode of transportation? Although I think I know the answer.
Motorcycle, specifically Harley Davidson, but I'll just say motorcycle.
Who do you like to travel with?
Nobody at all. Myself.
Good man. Let's see if how long that lasts in life. That's the way I used to travel.
Oh no! And you're me, and I'm you, so it's going to happen.
Well, there are some benefits. You'll see. Two forks diverged in the road. Which way would you go?
I'm immediately thinking left. The reason is this happened to me. I was just coming out of, I don't know how to say it, Nha Trang is how I would say it. It's a place in Vietnam. I'm sure you've been there, and it's very not what I would like to see in Vietnam. I stayed in a place that was opposite a place called the YOLO Hostel. And so it's very much not my type of place. And so I went out there, and then I was greeted by a fork in the road. The left way went into the mountains and went into the unknown. I had no idea where it went. I had no idea what I'd see. I just had no idea. The right fork, there we go. The right bend in the fork went up Highway 1, Highway 2. And if I were to go up that, I knew what I would see. I knew that people had gone there before. I knew what was in store for me. So I went left, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So I will say left.
Good man. Last question. Where will you go when you die?
I don't want to end on a down note, but I'm hopeful that there would be something, some sort of afterlife. I'm aware that we don't know what there is. I'm aware that we can only hear from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, but there is 40 kilohertz. We just can't hear it. So I think there is more stuff there we just cannot perceive it. And so I'm hopeful that there is some sort of afterlife, but I haven't quite talked myself into that yet. For me, again, ending on a down note, I believe there is nothing.
Well, we'll see how if you're right or not.
We'll see. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there.
Okay, thanks for being on the podcast, Hayden. I hope my listeners have enjoyed your travel musings, stories, and adventures. I'd like to thank my audience for listening, to remind them to subscribe on iTunes, to rate and review the show, to tell all their friends about the podcast, and to contact me about anything at erictrules.com. Oh, and to listen to the next travelogue in 2 weeks. Until then, happy trails. Original music composed by Amanda Yamate, sound designed by Alicia Bermudez, produced by Harry Duran at Fullcast. Please contact us with your feedback and to schedule an on-air interview. This podcast has been supported with the USC Capstone Grant. Special thanks to Phil Allen and the School of Dramatic Arts for their support.